Good afternoon and good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending our webinar, How Law Firms Are Stopping Attacks with Autonomous Cyber Defense. I'm Todd Weller, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Bandura, and pleased to be doing this in partnership with ILTA. It's also my pleasure to have Richard Timble, Senior Manager Information Security from Davis Polk with us today. Rich is going to provide some really unique perspectives from a user. So we'll talk a lot about use cases. So looking really forward to that. From an agenda perspective, we're going to talk about why law firms need cyber intelligence. We'll talk about the challenges law firms face when it comes to intelligence. We'll talk about how Bandura solves those challenges. And then we're going to dig into some use case examples. We'll take a quick look at a mid-sized law firm use case, and then we'll turn it over to Rich, and Rich will give you the perspective from a large global law firm. We'll then do a Q&A that'll focus on the use case and any questions you have there, especially for Rich. And then after that, we'll do a quick demo, and then we'll close it up with Q&A to see if there's any product-related questions. If you have questions, all you have to do is hit the Q&A button on the Zoom at the bottom and just submit your question, and we'll take them. So why do law firms need cyber intelligence? Well, the obvious reason is that law firms continue to be targets of cyber attacks. Right? This is a trend that's been increasing for the last several years, and there's certainly good reason for it, right? Every law firm has access to really sensitive and valuable data from all the clients you're servicing. And so it's no surprise that attackers have set their sights on legal as a vertical, and we've seen that increase. And here you see a few examples of that. Ransomware attacks have been big news over the last year or so. And what's also interesting and important, right, is it's law firms of all sizes. So it's not just big law firms, it's small and mid-sized law firms as well. When it comes to defending against cyber threats, it's really a volume game, right? Cyber threats themselves is a volume game, right? Volume has been increasing, velocity increases, but to stop attacks, law firms really need to use a large volume of threat intelligence to combat attackers. What is threat intelligence? I'd like to always kind of baseline when we're talking about it. And here's a couple definitions. So the first is from SANS Institute, and they define it as a set of data collected, assessed, and applied with regard to security threats, bad actors, exploits, malware vulnerabilities, and compromise indicators. The second definition is from one of our partners, Recorded Future. And I love it just because it's real simple, right? Threat intelligence is knowledge that allows you to prevent or mitigate cyber attacks. Using threat intelligence can be a real force multiplier for your cyber defense. And here we talk about multi-source threat intelligence. This is threat intelligence from multiple sources. Importantly, this is not the threat intelligence you're getting out of an existing security control, like a firewall or your endpoint. This is threat intelligence from these different types of providers. And you'll see kind of, it spans the spectrum. There's commercial threat intelligence specialists. These are companies that are in the business of producing very valuable threat intelligence. There's a few examples there, companies like Domain Tools, Intel 471, Insights, Recorded Future, Webroot, just to name a few. There's also a lot of great threat intelligence that's open source. Examples there, blocklist.de, SIN's Army List, Fiodo Tracker. The government is also a great source of threat intelligence. So whether it's federal efforts like Department of Homeland Security and CISA to state efforts. For example, state of Missouri has a threat intelligence feed from their Security Operations Center. And it's a really high fidelity and valuable source of threat intelligence. Industry threat intelligence is critical, right? We know that threat actors have industry-specific campaigns. So if you're a law firm, becoming a member and using and consuming threat intelligence from Legal Services ISAL is important. And then, of course, every law firm generates their own threat intelligence based on what you're seeing from your existing security controls, and just as well as the overall activity you're seeing in your network that's unique to your environment. And that is also a very, very valuable component of threat intelligence. Threat intelligence has significant value. It really comes down to a few key things, right? It helps law firms better protect themselves. It helps you to detect and respond to threats faster. This is some data from Recorded Future, and I'll just highlight a few of the points here. For example, being able to identify threats earlier by 10x is a big kind of benefit. Faster resolution of security threats by 63%. Being able to identify threats before they do impact, a 22% increase. So that is real ROI and real benefit to helping you kind of protect your network. Now, while threat intelligence has real benefit in return, it's not without its challenges. And these span a couple different areas. So to summarize, consuming cyber intelligence today is very complex. It can be expensive, and most importantly, ineffective. It starts with data. There's millions and millions, just lots of different sources of threat intelligence that's out there. So the first thing you have to do is wade through all that and figure out which sources you want to use and should be using. And there's lots of them. That takes time and effort. Once you've started your journey with threat intelligence and started with some sources, right, you then need to manage it and to deploy it. And that takes more resources, takes time, right? Takes money. You need a staff. You need skills, and oftentimes you need third-party systems to be able to do that, like a threat intelligence platform. Then comes the most important step, which is taking action with threat intelligence. That's really critical, right? What good is threat intelligence if you're not doing something with it to protect your network and your organization? And there you're going to find some additional challenges. For example, integrating threat intelligence into an existing security control, like a firewall or an endpoint, can be very challenging because they're not built to be able to do that. And we're going to dig into that in more detail. So one of the things we hear a lot when talking to law firm and all customers in general is there's a perception that your existing security controls have you covered. They're using threat intelligence. And that challenge is really driven in a lot of ways by marketing in cybersecurity, because every vendor says they detect and block threats using threat intelligence. And that in many ways is a true statement. For example, a firewall detects and blocks based on their threat intelligence. It's threat intelligence that's unique to them. But that's very, very different from the threat intelligence we just talked about, which is multi-source threat intelligence from all those different sources. So what's kind of interesting, right, is that every law firm cyber attack, right, every attack at some point got past the firewall. And this is true of attacks in general. Now, firewalls provide a very important foundational layer of network defense, but they're clearly alone insufficient to protect your network. And here we see some key gaps. The first one is they clearly don't catch every threat. And that goes back to what I just mentioned, is they operate with too narrow a view of the threat landscape. The threat intelligence that your vendor uses has value, but it's just one vendor's perspective. And the threat landscape is just far too big for any one vendor to give you kind of complete coverage. So if we take that to the next step and say, okay, I'm going to go out and use threat intelligence from different sources. Then you run into a second challenge or a second gap, which is firewalls have limited ability to be able to add cyber intelligence. And we'll dig into that a little bit deeper and show you some real data on there. That'll be kind of, I think, eye-opening for lots of folks. And then the third challenge is that for the threat intelligence you can integrate into the firewall, updating it is manual and too slow for many organizations. And that's because many organizations today are still kind of manually managing block and allow lists on their firewalls. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these threat intelligence challenges with the focus on next-gen firewalls. Next-gen firewalls do lots of great things. One of the things they don't do really well is integrate third-party threat intelligence. So there's significant limits in terms of the volume of third-party intelligence that can be integrated into a firewall. There's also limits on the number and size of lists. And importantly, there's also limited ways you can integrate data into a firewall. A manual block list, for example, and from an automated perspective, most firewalls only allow you to ingest a text file over HTTPS. It's just a very limited mechanism to be able to pull intelligence in. Here is some real world data that validates this. So what you see on the top is domain list and IP address limits for external block lists for a leading next-gen firewall. There you can see on the domain side, it ranges from 50,000 to 4 million. On the IP side, it ranges from 50,000 to 150,000. To put that in context, below are two examples of third-party threat feeds. First is an IP reputation feed from a leading commercial provider. You can see that's just under 4 million IPs. And the second is a malicious domain block list from another commercial provider. There you can see that is over 3.5 million. So as you can see, it doesn't take much threat intelligence to run up against the limits that you have with a next generation firewall. These limits lead to other significant issues as well. So we find that organizations have to spend more time managing firewall block lists because you have to manage the intelligence within the constraints of what the firewall will let you. There also can be block list curation issues. For example, having to age off indicators more rapidly than expected. These are areas Richard Timble will hit on because I know they were areas that he had experienced and was looking to solve. Also with threats and threat intelligence, right, it's constantly changing. It's very dynamic. So you run into these never-ending cycles of identifying bad and getting it blocked. The result is you're really not getting a full ROI on threat intelligence data investments. So at Bandura, let's talk about how we solve this challenge. We fill the gap by doing what firewalls can't do. Our platform uses massive volumes of cyber intelligence to detect and block threats on your network in real time. We let you easily add cyber intelligence from any source with no limits. And we automate and simplify the deployment enforcement of the intelligence on your network. The end result for our law firm customers is that they're significantly improving their network protection, being able to detect and block more threats. There's increased efficiency of security operations, time savings, reduced manual work. And then they also see significant improvements from a firewall and overall network performance. This provides a detailed look at how our platform works. It's a SaaS platform that really pulls together three things: cyber intelligence, security automation, and network enforcement into a single platform. There's a cloud component where we aggregate and integrate threat intelligence. You can see that up on the top portion. All the out-of-the-box threat intelligence we provide through partnerships with leading providers. For example, Webroot and Domain Tools are two commercial threat feeds that every customer gets as part of their subscription. We also have a lot of open source feeds, DHS feeds, State of Missouri SOC. Overall, 30 plus cyber intelligence feeds coming as part of the Bandura platform. And then from an industry perspective, we make it easy for our customers that are members of ISACs and ISAOs like LSISAO to easily integrate data into the platform. And then there's also other ways to make it easy for you to bring data in. So we have basic connectors, for example, pull in a list of IPs or domains that are on a text file over HTTPS, pull it in via Stix and Taxi, or upload a CSV, to our third-party integrations, which is growing. And there you can see we have out-of-the-box integrations with leading threat intelligence providers, threat intelligence platforms, SOAR providers, SIMs, et cetera. A few months back, to give our customers even more choice, we launched our cyber intelligence marketplace. There you can access additional cyber intelligence feeds from leading vendors like the ones shown there. So out in the cloud, we're aggregating and integrating threat intelligence. Then the user is interfacing through our management application, setting up which policy, setting up very simple policies, activating lists, enabling the list. And then our cloud service is sending the policies and the indicators constantly down to our threat blockers. Threat blocker sits inline on a network and looks at the inbound and the outbound traffic and makes an allow or deny decision based on all the threat intelligence that's in the platform, as well as based on GeoIP and autonomous system number, whose network is it. As you can see, there's a couple different threat blocker types there. A threat blocker can be flexibly deployed in on-prem environments, on a physical appliance or virtual platform like VMware, KVM. Can also be deployed to protect cloud networks like AWS and Azure. And then for remote workers, which is clearly a growing trend that we've seen accelerated by the pandemic, we have Threat Blocker Anywhere, which is an as-a-service model to protect those users. Regardless of how you deploy Threat Blocker, it's doing the same thing. It's protecting your network using all that threat intelligence. And it's logging every connection, providing very rich information about threats targeting your network, what's being blocked. And all that information is easily exportable via very robust syslog export capabilities, allowing you to export it out to a syslog server or a SIEM of your choice. A real important point is, while we fill a key gap that firewalls have, we are a complement to firewalls. We have over 300 customers have deployed the Bandura platform today. And in each case, it's been as a critical layer of protection that complements their firewall. We've already hit on some of the key differences, but I'll sum it up here. From a threat blocker perspective, we're about using a broad array of cyber intelligence from multiple sources, not just a narrow kind of one vendor lens. Our ability to integrate third-party data is very high in terms of the volume and the ways you can get data in compared to a firewall. We talked about the 150 million indicators. So threat blocker, that far exceeds what a firewall can do, which, as we showed on those other, the other data, right? On the IP side, it was 50,000 to 150,000 in domains. So it's really low millions that your firewall can handle. Now, firewalls do a lot of things we don't do, right? They do deep packet inspection. We don't. The reason we can do the scale that we can is because we only focus on the packet header and we only focus on IP domains. Deep packet inspection is important. And firewalls have that ability, allowing you to look at additional indicator types like URLs, IPS signatures, and file hashes. Finally, from a policy management perspective, consistent feedback that we get is just very simple to do things with Bandura compared to a firewall. So now we're going to transition to use cases, and start off with a mid-sized law firm example. And this was an interesting situation. The law firm really felt like they were covered by their existing security stack, and they had a very good stack. Next-gen firewall, endpoint, using a managed security service provider as well, and they really felt their firewall provided them sufficient coverage. But they came across Bandura, and they were intrigued by what they saw and said, "Hey, we'll kick the tires." So they evaluated our platform. They deployed us behind the firewall. And the reason they put us there was they wanted to see what threats were getting through the firewall. Well, when they did that, it was an eye-opening experience. So Bandura not only provided significant visibility into threats that were bypassing the firewall, but we were also blocking them, which is equally important. As a result, the customer deployed us as a critical layer of network protection. They deployed us in front of the firewall. That was the production deployment. And they've been a happy customer. And what's really great is they've been a customer for several years, and you can still see the value that our platform is adding. This literally was a comment that came through our customer support last month, where they described an issue they had where a user downloaded a malicious file and executed it. It got past their force-point web filter, their Cisco Firepower firewall, their Sentinel-1 endpoint software. They did get an alert from Dell SecureWorks, their MSSP, but as they mentioned, it was Bandura that saved the day and prevented the data from being exfiltrated. And a nice thank you. So to me, there's nothing better than seeing the validation from customers that are running the platform. So with that said, I'm excited to be able to pass it over to Richard Timble. Richard is the Senior Information Security Manager for Davis Polk. And Richard's going to give you some great perspectives about how a large global law firm here is using our platform.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sound good, Rich.
Okay. All right, good. I want to make sure my mute button was working properly. So I was looking at the list of attendees. I actually know several of you personally, so good to see you all here. And thank you, Todd. So yeah, a lot of what Todd said, I'm going to reaffirm with specifics to us. The problem we were having, and it was something that was surprising to me about 5-6 years ago, was that we kind of blew up some of our smaller firewalls with the amount of threat intelligence we were trying to push to it, because we had adopted a threat intelligence platform, and we were curating a lot of indicators, compromised IOCs, and trying to push them out, and wondering why things were getting through that we were pushing out from threat intelligence. And in one case, we actually blocked up one of our firewalls. And that's when I discovered that even the next gen firewalls have those hard limits to how many IOCs they can have. And Todd's slide was great at showing that. And we have some pretty beefy devices on our firewalls. And it was, even back then, it was even lower. It's about half the numbers that Todd showed you. Those numbers are kind of from the last year or two of the newer gen of the next gen firewalls. So that was very eye-opening to me, because we had a presumption that we were blocking all the IPs and domains that we were sending to the firewalls. And we found out that that wasn't the case, because when it reaches its limit, it truncates all other entries from that point and on. And then if you're trying to rotate in and out, of course, that there's issues with that. So we were looking for a solution at the time to help us absorb more threat intelligence at the perimeter, to be able to block these things that we know were bad domains, bad IP addresses. We were hoping to be able to block all Tor nodes, for example, because we did not feel that there was any Tor traffic that should be hitting us. So that's when, we first had Bandura, and what he basically presented to you is what we discussed, and it made sense. So we figured we'd try a POC, see how that went, and if the rubber hit the road. And it was really illuminating, because it did, and I'll get a little more into our deployment life cycle and the management of that. But statistically speaking, it was really kind of crazy what the difference was. Where we thought we were blocking a lot of things from that, we found out that what we blocked once we had the Bandura in place, had all our locations, we were actually probably missing about 50% of all the threats that were hitting us. And that load was, on the firewall. Now that's where, some of the defense mechanisms on the firewall, like the IPS IDS, might kick in because of the type of packet traffic that's coming in. But the reality is, you don't want to make that firewall work that hard all the time. Just to give you an idea, I pulled statistics this month for September. Just from total blocks by category, we experienced 620 million plus blocks. That's 620 million blocks that the firewall would have had to try and achieve through category. Put that load on there, and we were able to buffer the firewall and that block it before that even tried to hit the firewall. And of that, 46 plus million were from Tor exit nodes. So that gives you an idea of how much threat that you don't realize is going on out there, because everything's kind of behind the curtains with the firewall. But imagine if even 1/100% got through the firewall, and hopefully your other defenses stop it. But that's traffic that you don't need to be challenged by. So and just even on our IP domain block list alone, we experienced 439 plus million blocks last month in September alone. I have my console up, and I was just curious while this presentation was going on, how many blocks happened. 33,000 blocks we got since this started. So it gives you an idea how many threats. These are realistic threats that are out there and hitting us. And the first use case we had was having some kind of technology in place to help us actually address and absorb all the threat intelligence that we do get through some of the public feeds that you mentioned, from the state, from federal. Also, WebRoot and Domain Tools has a great high fidelity list on there, but also the customized list was really important to us. If we didn't have room, because we were taking all these public feeds and government feeds, then what room did we have to add the things that were very industry specific that we got through the LSI cell, for example, or that we examined through our malware analysis, from things we saw through phishing or from peer sharing. So this now gives us the ability to absorb. We're not even hitting 10% of the capacity that the Bandura gives us, but we are hitting probably 2 to 3 times what our firewalls would give us ability to block. So that was the first use case, and that was very useful. And I could have checked the box, said mission successful at that point, and we achieved what we wanted to Bandura. But one of the things that over the years, and we've been a Bandura customer for a bit now, that we've also observed is, we were trying to mature our perimeter defenses, by adding things like SSL inspection in place, and that adds quite a load to the firewall. We were also, putting certain DDoS strategies in place, and these are all things that take a little bit of, or in some cases, a lot of resources away from the firewall to do. If it's also processing threat intelligence, that's also taking, from according to our vendor, 1 to 3% of its resources to process. However, because I have this in front, our Bandura is deployed in line between the internet and our firewall, so it's actually protecting the firewall. It's allowing me not just to take that load off of from the threat intelligence perspective off the firewall, but also allow it to have more resources to do faster SSL inspection and better reaction time to DDoS. Because if I'm blocking, known threat botnets in a DDoS attack at the Bandura before it even hits my firewall, the chances of my firewall being overwhelmed and experiencing DDoS is greatly reduced. So that was kind of an added value benefit that we saw after becoming a customer, and then looking at the resources difference between the firewall before Bandura and afterwards. So that was something really good. As far as the deployment, we have devices in every office between the internet circuits and ours. Obviously, we have the bigger devices in the data center, but we also have high availability failover. And Bandura has been very good about helping us realize how our architecture is, and where we had something that was unique. They were very responsive in helping us make sure that our high availability stayed high availability, and did not add any latency, or interruption in what our architecture was. So it was a pretty seamless deployment. And now when we deploy a box in a new location, or it's a matter of couple hours to do, and that's mostly from the operations side, cabling everything and putting in the rack. The actual software install and making sure everything's working is really probably under half an hour, so it's very quick. From a maintenance standpoint, it really probably takes less than an hour combined on my team to just give an eyeball to everything, making sure everything's okay. And we probably don't even need to do that, but we like to make sure everything's working well. And then every so often when a new version comes out, there's an upgrade process, but that only takes a couple hours globally. So it's really, I think he used the term force multiplier, and that is something that I definitely can reaffirm we experience. The amount of time we used to spend on curating our threat intelligence, deciding what feeds need to age out, because we only had a limit on the smaller firewalls of 50,000, and making those decisions. It could take hours of meetings about it, and now that was all recovered time. So that really was a benefit. And everything, everything in the solution, no matter what the size of our infrastructure, was very scalable. So we really were pleased by that. But I really think that one of the other benefits is that we're able to very quickly block or allow if there's a false positive. Occasionally you'll have an address of a client that was blacklisted by one of the services because they had a botnet on their system, so they end up on one of these threat intelligence lists, and we find out it's a client and they cleaned up their environment, so we're comfortable allowing them. It takes us a matter of minutes to allow that through. But on the other hand, when we find something that's very relevant, maybe we'll get some threat intelligence that's very timely from one of our threat intelligence sources, or from the LSI SAL, or even experience something in a phishing email that we see that is maybe a new vector from an IOC perspective. We can add and block that to the Bandura platform within a matter of minutes, and protect our entire global environment in a one-step process, right? So we don't have to update every firewall with that IP or domain. We put it to one place, and it pushes out, and we have a very quick response time because of that. So so that's a benefit as well. What's on the next slide, Todd? Go to the next slide. Yeah, so, okay, I think I covered that. Let's see, firewall is definitely more focused, more efficient. So I gave you some statistics, and these statistics are things I basically pulled up while we were talking. Some of them, and the visibility from the dashboard perspective, what you're blocking, granular all the way down to the specific ISC, or what your policies are, things like that. I mean, it's um, a matter of a click here, a click there. It's very quick. The visibility is good. The reporting is very good. The capability to push that out to uh, my bigger reports that I report upward is very easy. So I definitely kudos on that. Simple deploy, I think we covered, and yeah, that reactive concept versus making it more proactive. That's definitely true, because now we're able to manage the threats prior to actually having to talk about what threats we're most concerned about, and saying, oh well, we can't fit all the Tor exit nodes in our firewall, so we'll put those aside and just add something from the LSI feed instead. So we don't have to do that pick and choose anymore. We can basically all we can eat from that perspective, and it's very easy from there. So um, if anyone has any questions about our use case, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I think I covered the highlights of our value. So
Great. Yeah. So at this time, what we'd love to do, because Rich does have another obligation, and we want to kind of focus some questions here on the use cases. So if you have a question about the use case and how Rich and the team is using the product, hit the Q&A button and pop your question in there. We're going to take a few questions, and then what we'll do is we're going to give you a quick tour of the platform, a demo, so you can see it in action. So feel free to hit us up with questions. We got one here. Rich, can you talk about your experience in terms of the initial deployment and then ongoing manageability? What's the kind of level of effort required for you and your team?
yeah, sure, no problem, Todd. And as I've referred to it earlier before, the actual deployment, it took us more time to connect the cables than it did to actually deploy the software behind the appliances and integrate it into the team. We deployed, let's see, 9 locations around the world, and I think if I took the collective time, most of the time was more around the wiring and cabling. If I took all the wiring cabling out, I would say it probably took less than an hour, maybe even sort of 30 minutes to deploy each one from that perspective, and integrate in there. From an ongoing perspective, I spend maybe about 15 minutes a week to get the statistics for my reporting upward, to get the visibility of what we're protecting. And that's just because I dig into a lot of reports. I could probably get the high level reports in a couple of minutes. My team, on an average, I would say collectively, I'd be surprised if they spend more than an hour between all of them inside there. Some weeks probably a lot less than that. So the most time we ever spend on it is maybe once every couple of months when we do an upgrade, and the global upgrade for all our devices to get to a new version is maybe 2 hours, if that. So it's very low overhead from that, and especially compared to how much time we were spending before on threat intelligence, and kind of babying the firewalls to take what we wanted in there. We were probably spending an average of 20 to 40 hours a month before, and now I'm talking less than a handful of hours. So I recouped half a head count, half a head count a week, essentially, when you look at the number of hours difference there. So that's our experience from that side, but very easy to deploy. One of the easiest tech products and security I've ever deployed, for that matter.
Then another question, and so I think this relates more to threat intelligence in general. What's your experience been as far as false positives, and what's your strategy for dealing with them?
Yeah. So I mean, false positives, we do get some false positives. Probably, I would say less than 10 a week, if that. And that's the nature of just threat intelligence. That has nothing to do with Bandura. It really is from where we're absorbing. I'll give you a very good example. There was a pretty high fidelity feed. I won't mention it offhand, but about, I would say when we first deployed, so maybe about 2 years ago, roughly around there, uh, that somehow in that feed it got poisoned. Someone added the quad nines on there, 9.9.9.9.9.9. That's IBM's DNS server, and it somehow got on there, and we were using quad nines, as one of our resolve servers. So we did have some block traffic, but we were able to see that right away. We were able to go in Bandura and see, okay, we did a search for that address, saw that it was there, we saw what feed it came from, and we were able to whitelist it. Once it was reported to us, our total from reported symptom to fixing what was a global problem probably was 5 minutes, right? So that's I think pretty quick for something like that. But that false positive, and that was an extreme case of a false positive, came from actually well-respected and widely used feed, and I'm sure we're not the only people who got blocked that day, from it. So false positives do happen. It's really a matter of how fast you can cure it, right? And I think in that case, we cured it extremely fast because of the partnership we have with Bandura as well. Most false positives we see are not that extreme. They tend to be clients, smaller clients, mostly, who somehow, they had an email compromise, or they had, something in their infrastructure that was compromised temporarily to either be used to send out phishing emails or something like that. So, someone reported them, they got on a blacklist, rightly so, actually, and then they get cured, and maybe that entry is still on the list after they've been cured. In some cases, we saw it's not really a false positive; they still have the issue and didn't fix it. So, I wouldn't consider it a false positive, but we have to take into account they are a client, and then interact with them in a way that we feel safe from traffic from them. So we have maybe at the most 10 of those cases a week. Sometimes we go several weeks without any of them. So that hopefully answers your question.
And that last question here, Rich, is have you seen tangible benefits on the firewall in terms of kind of performance and efficiency front? And I know in the past we've talked about how just even a little bit of resource savings on a firewall can view as a big deal.
Well, especially if you're doing SSL inspection. 1% doesn't sound like a lot until you're doing masses of SSL inspection. So look, my network guys, so we have a network department within Data Bespoke, independent. They pretty much manage from an operational point of view the firewalls. From a security perspective, we're just a consumer of that data, and I have a good relationship with my peer in networking, and he's definitely happy we put the vendors in place. Typically, when you put something in line, people kind of freak out, but there was definitely a benefit from there. And I asked him to quantify that, and he didn't really have the statistics to quantify the exact percentage from the day we deployed it, but he said they definitely saw efficiencies in the CPU utilization and memory utilization on the firewalls. So from that perspective, they definitely saw that. We definitely saw a realization. How's that quantify financially? I really couldn't tell you. That's a hard metric. But what I can tell you is that the firewalls, as I mentioned, we saw if you add between the blocks, from the threat list, and then blocks by category, we're talking 1.1 billion with a B blocks that were done on the Bandura device in 1 month that did not have to hit the firewall. And I think that's substantial enough, even if each one is like 1 millionth of a percent. That adds up and does give that back. Plus, it also, from a DDoS perspective, if that's all hitting there, let's say people are throwing a lot of packets from known IP botnets that are out there and are hitting my firewall, eventually, they'll achieve their goal of a DDoS on the firewall. If I have something buffering it like the Bandura, which can absorb a lot from being able to block the IOCs once they're identified, and those IOCs come out pretty quickly on these high fidelity lists. that really helps me uh, maintain, operationally speaking, our network being up. Even though my perspective is from a security perspective, from an operational perspective, that is definitely a benefit that we have seen to some degree in the past couple of years since we've been a Bandura partner. So um, hopefully that answers your question too.
Great. Well, that looks like it's it for questions for Rich in the use case side. So Rich, really appreciate you taking part. I know you
Sure.
gotta run, but appreciate it. Nothing better than hearing real perspectives from users. So
Yeah,
with that,
no problem. And I just want to say, and like I said, I know several people in your attendees list. If anyone has any questions offline or want to send me directly via email or talk about it more, I'm always available. We could find a time I'm available, but I'm always, happy to discuss in deeper our experience. So,
great. Really appreciate that. So with
all
that,
right.
we're going to transition to a demo and give you a quick look at the platform so you can see it in action. So here what you can see is our global management center. This is the application our users spend 99% of the time interacting with the platform. And this is some of that data Rich was just talking about. You're going to see kind of a high level view here of what's happening on the network. How many connections are allowed or denied? And I'm going to refresh this so we get the most recent data. So here you can see that, and I went to last month. Here you can see in the last month, 2.6 million connections allowed, or I'm sorry, denied, and then just over 1.8 million allowed. And you can see the reason. Is it based on a country or GeoIP policy? Is it because it's on a block list or denied list? Is it based on IP reputation? And those are those categorized and scored IP indicators. So here you can see another look at the threat category, denied by threat category, here over 1 million. And these are, again, IPs that are botnets or categorized as command and control, endpoint exploits, scanner, proxy VPN, Tor anonymizer. Rich had mentioned that. Then you also get a look at what countries are we allowing and denying, and whose networks based on ASN are coming into the network. So all this is real valuable, high-level metadata around what's happening in the network. For detailed information, in a bit, I'm going to show you the detailed logs, which really gets into the source and destination IP and more specifics. But here you get a very easy, simple view of what's happening. And I like to say this is the end game. We're taking action with threat intelligence on your network in real time. So how do you get to that point? It starts with the threat intelligence that's in the platform and that you integrate into the platform. And there's really 3 list types that comes from: threat lists, denied lists, and allowed lists. Threat lists, again, are categorized and scored IPs. This is where Webroot, you can see it. I mentioned every customer gets Webroot's IP reputation feed. Here you can see it's just under 3.9 million IPs on there at the moment. And again, here you're going to see some of the real time and the automation that's occurring, right? The last sync was just a minute ago. The last update was 3 minutes ago. So the Webroot feed, there's typically an update every few minutes because IPs are constantly changing, whether IPs coming on or off the list or the scores constantly changing. I can click into Webroot and get a quick view of what IPs have been coming onto the feed most recently, what's the category, and what's the score. Score is 1 to 100. The higher the score, the higher the probability it's malicious. So that's threat lists. Denied lists we have for both IP and domain. So let's look at IP first. So here you're going to see, again, more of the out-of-the-box cyber intelligence feeds we're providing. Open source intelligence like blocklist.de, SIN's Army List, DHS, we're part of their collaborative information sharing program. So we have a DHS feed related to that. Every customer gets a domain tools IP hot list. These are 50,000 IPs that domain tools deems to be malicious because over 50% of the domains on these IPs are malicious. State of Missouri SOC, which we mentioned, is a great kind of state threat intel source that's really, really valuable. The domain side, It's highlighted by domain tools block list. Here you can see 3.8 million domains. These are domains that domain tools risk scores 99 out of 100. So these are, not domains I'm necessarily going to be typing into my URL, but they're part of, phishing links and malicious links that folks are, attackers are trying to get folks to click on. So that's denied lists, which are blocked lists. We talked about false positives, right? And with threat intelligence, and when you're dealing with threat intelligence at scale, you're going to run into false positives from time to time. Things happen. That's where allowed lists really come into play. And here you're going to see that, one of the things we've done is really add a lot more automated allowed lists for popular web services and applications. And this has been driven by demand for our customers for this. And for example, Google and Microsoft publish their IPs. And so we go out and aggregate and curate them, make sure they're constantly updated, and put those into lists that can easily be enabled by the customer. So if you're a Microsoft shop, turn on our Microsoft allowed list. If you're Google, here you can see other ones we've gotten requested for, DocuSign, Fastly. But allowed lists are a great mechanism to be able to proactively allow known good traffic, and then to reactively deal with false positives when you have to allow something. So what you've seen is a lot of the cyber intelligence data we provide as part of the platform, but also important, we make it very easy for you to integrate data into the platform. So I'm going to show you a few examples of this on the IP side. It works the same for the domain side. So if you want to create a manual IP block list or domain block list or allow list, you can easily do that. But we also have plugins to enable these kind of automated integrations. For example, I mentioned our HTTP capability. So if you have IPs, single line and a text file accessible via URL, simply type in the URL, name your list, how often do you want our platform to pull it? If you need authentication, enter it, and then press create. And just like that, you'd have an automated list. You can do the same thing with the CSV file connector. Just tell us where that CSV is. Let's say it's Google Drive. Put in the URL, name your list, how often do you want the platform to pull, and press create. Stix Taxi, as I mentioned, ISAC, ISAO integrations, and then third-party integrations, with organizations like Insights, Recorded Future, Threat Connect, Threat Stop, TrueStar, and this list continues to grow based on proactive moves by us and based on demand we have from our customers. So very, very easy for you to integrate data into the platform. So the next step becomes then how do you actionize that data? And that comes down to policies. And policies are very, very simple. So here you can see I have an inbound and an outbound policy. Risk thresholds relates to those threat lists, those categorized and scored IPs like we get from WebRoot. And here it simply is the category enabled or not, and set your blocking threshold. So here I've set to 80 for command and control, which means that any IP that is command and control with a score of 80 or higher is going to be blocked. If you want to change that, let's say you prefer 90 and you want to get more conservative on your blocking, simply move the slider or type in the number, and you now block any IPs that are 90 and higher. So very, very simple as far as setting risk thresholds for those threat categories. Denied lists and allowed lists are even easier, and it works the same for both. They're tied to the policy. So for my inbound, is my list activated or not? If for some reason you don't want Talos IP RBL on, simply uncheck it and press save. But it's very, very simple. And as I mentioned, the same for the allowed list. They're tied to the policy. The last thing I'll show you here is country for GeoIP. And here we have a real simple and intuitive map. So you can start with, a deny all policy and then open up what you want to open, or come the other way, allow all and block what you want to block. And then if you're like me and somewhat geographically challenged and you can't kind of find a country on the map, you can easily type it over here and see it. So very, very simple policy management. On Threat Blocker itself, the primary reason customers go here, and really kind of the only reason, because we've moved more functionality to our SaaS app, is the rich logs. So here I'm going to go in and take a look at what's happening. And you can see kind of really easy to read, intuitive view of what's happening on the network. Here's an interesting one to highlight. This was an inbound that was denied. It was from Russia. There's the ASN 000. You can see kind of what the specific IP was. It was denied because it was on a denied list. But I can also see here that there's threat categories. So I can click on the threat category and see, well, it was a scanner and an endpoint exploit with a score of 93. So that would have been blocked based on our threat list and our risk threshold setting as well. However, the way our enforcement works is denied list takes precedent over the threat list. So the denied list caught it. A really cool feature our customers love is threat source attribution. So I can come over here and click on this arrow and see which list was this indicator on. So not only was it on one denied list, it was on two, DHS and SIN's Army list. And then it was also on WebRoot as well. So from that perspective, so very, very rich data. We make it very, very easy for you to export it out to a syslog server or a SIM of your choice. And all the logs are fully RFC compliant, and we have great filtering. Simply come in here, enter your syslog server, the port description, which logs you want to export, and then which resource groups. Do you just want to send out the blocks? Do you just want to send out outbound blocks? You can do that. Or if you want to send out blocks, allows, or threats that are on a specific list, you can do that as well. So that's the high level demo. Again, real powerful, a lot of out-of-the-box cyber intelligence we provide. We make it very easy for you to integrate data into the platform. It's highly automated. It's real time, right? Everything's constantly being updated and sent down to the threat blockers, and also it's protecting you, right? Which is kind of the most critical point. So before we go to questions, let's sum it up. So, cyber attacks are a key risk for law firms, right? We talked about that at the beginning, and law firms have valuable data and the threats have been increasing. Threat intelligence can be a real force multiplier, and that's using threat intelligence from multiple sources. And there's lots of benefits to it. But we also talked about some of the challenges. It can be complex, it can be resource intensive, it can be expensive, and the model today is it's hard to be effective. We talked about existing controls where a lot of law firms and customers in general feel like they're covered because they're using threat intelligence. But the threat intelligence they're using is proprietary. It's their own threat intelligence. You can't take that intelligence out and use it elsewhere. And as we talked about, it's really hard to add intelligence into the firewall. And for the intelligence you can, you're really limited in terms of the volume and the ways you can integrate it in. We talked about how Bandura helps you solve these challenges. We have put together a very easy to use SaaS-based platform that integrates cyber intelligence, automation, and network enforcement into something that's very simple and easy to deploy and use. And then we went through some use cases, right? And talked about how a mid-sized law firm is using and gaining value from our platform. And we heard from Richard Timble, Davis Polk around how a large global law firm is using our platform as well. And that's critical, right? We have 300 customers today, and we span the spectrum from large enterprises to small and mid-size, and the same thing from a law firm perspective. So with that, we're going to move to, if you have a question, feel free to hit the Q&A button, put that question in there. We'll get it answered, and we'll take a few questions, and then send everybody on their way. All right, so I got one question here, which is, do you deploy Bandura in front of or behind the firewall? And that's a really great question. As I mentioned in the mid-sized firm use case, they actually evaluated us by deploying us behind their firewall because they wanted to see what was getting through the firewall. But then in the production deployment, they deployed us in front of the firewall. So most of our customers, 90% plus, put us in front of the firewall. By putting us in front, they're able to block a lot of the known noisy threats before they hit the firewall. If you know it's bad, block it. Why send it to do deep packet inspection on connection sources that are bad? And that's the primary driver, and that gets you those firewall efficiency and effectiveness benefits. One of the challenges in front of the firewall is because of network address translation, you can't really see the source IP, right? The host IP. However, the way customers solve that is they will correlate our logs with logs from another source, whether that's in a SIM or some other mechanism to gain that visibility. When you put us behind the firewall, then you get full visibility into source and destination, right? But then you lose a lot of those kind of inbound, the barrage of inbound traffic kind of coming into your network, those firewall efficiency benefits from that direction. So most customers deploy us in front, some put us behind, and we have some that put us in both places on the network. Let's see. It's got another question. How does Bandura license its platform? That's a great question as well. So software subscription. And the subscriptions are based on protected throughput. So we have 500 megabits and then a gig and higher. And what that subscription gets you is access to the threat blocker software, our cloud-based management application, all of that out of the box data. We mentioned 30 plus cyber intelligence feeds, the GeoIP, ASN IP data, and then basic support and software updates come with that subscription. For physical appliances, if you want to run it on hardware provided by Bandura, then we also have a couple appliances you would pay for separately, one-time upfront fee that gets you the appliance. It's commercial off-the-shelf server, so you would pay for that as well. The beauty of this model is it works in an on-prem environment and in cloud. And so if you want to deploy Threat Blocker in AWS or Azure, you would use the same subscription, and you wouldn't pay any compute costs to Bandura, but of course there would be compute costs and bandwidth costs to the cloud provider, AWS or Azure. So we got one more question. What happens if I want to integrate data into the platform from a system that Bandura does not currently integrate with? Another really good question. So we are a very open platform. We're always expanding our integrations. If there's a source we don't support today, you just let us know, and chances are we can take a look at that and add it to the platform. Our platform gains significant value by having more integration points. I'll give you a good example. This is outside of legal, but we had a financial services customer that asked if we integrated with a bankers association, Texas Bankers Association threat feed from their ISAO. And my first response was no, but I didn't realize they had an ISAO, Texas Bankers Association, which was really cool. And so we reached out to Texas Bankers, ISAO, and worked with them. And within 3 weeks, we had an integration up and running, and we had the customer kind of consuming threat intel. So that's it. So we're all about being open. We want to do integrations. If there's a system we don't support today, you just let us know, and chances are we'll be able to easily add that as part of our platform. Great. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, excited to continue our partnership with ILTA. It was really great to hear David spoke, and I thank Rich again for participating and providing their perspectives. If you want more information, please check out banduracyber.com. There's a lot of great resources there. There's some fresh blogs we've written about the firewall gap problems and going through those in detail, and then how Bandura helps to fill the firewall gaps. And there, you also can check out our legal services data sheet for information specific to law firms that are large global law firms down to small and mid-sized law firms. So again, thank you everybody for participating. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.